How did you get? How did this become your project, and why specifically?
Well, obviously we were also attracted to the surreal aspect of North Korea and entering a world which is just unlike any other, especially from the standpoint of someone who's a director. And
yes,
we're directors. Not that we can't relate to your average Joe, but just like a director who has this kind of life story is uncommon. So that attracted us very much so, and also the idea of a director being given all that he wanted, everything he wants, but as a price. You're making films in a very, very oppressive state.
I mean, when we first came across the story, like most people, we were a little bit skeptical. Can it really be true? It seems like a crazy kind of Hollywood movie script. If he went willingly, then it really is a story of kind of Faustian temptation. He went there because he couldn't make films anymore in South Korea.
Sign a deal with the devil.
Everything by Kim Jong-il as the devil. As we carried on making the film, our perspective shifted a little bit. We kind of found out more. We found these tapes. They seemed to be suggesting that he was kidnapped. So rather than it being about whether or not he went willingly, it's more about, how long did he stay? What was it? Was he tempted to stay because of all these resources he's offered more than he needed to?
So you're way into the story. You gain access to Chow. I'll mispronounce her name, but Chow Yu-hee.
Chae-in-hee.
What was that first contact like? What kind of a rapport did you build with her to gain trust and also to gain access to those tapes? I don't know if those tapes came directly from her. How was that first contact with her?
The first contact was very formal.
Okay.
Because she's surrounded by, first of all, her son who's in the film business, but there's this, since Shin died, there's an organisation called the Shin Films Foundation, which is essentially a kind of board of all the kind of very important elderly men in South Korean cinema and arts. And so they have this kind of organisation that represents the rights and the kind of legacy of the films they made together. So we were kind of faced with this very formal kind of meeting where we sat, us and our interpreter in between us, and this kind of line of elderly men looking at us kind of clearly thinking we were too young to be making this film, and what do we know about it? So we had to kind of convince them a bit before we could even get to Che.
So you had to develop a trust level with people that are protective of her in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we had to sort of pitch to some extent, but it didn't take that long before we could meet Che, and she is, very charming and gracious, but she was understandably very protective over her story. She wanted to know if we had any kind of particular agenda, why we wanted to make the film, what we saw in the film. She liked the fact that we saw a romance element in the film. We saw it as a very kind of unusual love story, as well as everything else that's going on in this crazy story. We took a few trips, taking some very kind of English presents, teas and jams, which she liked, having some very, I had an umbrella, and having some kind of very kind of long, lengthy meals with her, and talking more about the film and what we wanted to do with it.
And during those discussions, did you talk to her about, because you bring a lot of different styles to the film, even when it's the recreation part. I mean, that's really, it was beautifully done, the matching of an era. I mean, I forgot that I was not watching doc material. I mean, that's how well it's done. Were you presenting to her the technical aspects, because she's very aware of cinema, right? So
well, her language in interviews is always coloured by filmmaking terms. That's how she sees the world, that's the life she's led. But no, she didn't really. I mean, she has actually directed films, but she's mainly an actress.
Okay.
And she was more interested in whether we were genuine, whether we were going to approach the story without prejudice, than the technical stylistic approach.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the tapes. I'm curious about how they even had access to that technology to begin with. The what do you call it? Mini tapes? The mini tape
cassette recorders. It's like a dictaphone essentially.
But how did they have access to that? That was my question mark.
It's a good question. There is a shop for basically ambassadors and special types elites
Okay.
in Pyongyang where you can buy foreign technology. So somehow they bought this, but that wasn't on the sly. They bought it in the knowledge of their minders, and ostensibly they said we're going to record this for like production notes. Like we need to.
Yeah, it's under the
this
guise
thing.
of production. It's
yeah.
one extra tool.
And I think that from their minders' point of view, the idea that they might record Kim Jong-il, this kind of deity, is just unconscionable. So I don't think they really entered their minds that this was going to happen at all.
While watching the film, sporadically I just thought about this, that in another dictatorship, Saddam Hussein was crazy about cinema. He actually made his own production, stuff like that. Is there what do you guys, I mean, you don't introduce this idea into the film, but what are your ideas about that? Why do dictators...
Well, loads of dictators obsessed with cinema because, it's a very powerful tool to influence
Propaganda.
hearts and minds. I think the North Koreans followed the Soviets to some extent, and that the Soviets obviously used cinema in the revolution and after
50s, 60s, yeah.
Kim Jong-il just took it to a whole new level.
Just on the basic level, you can read literature, you can see paintings, but you put a group of people in a darkened room, there's one screen, there's nothing else they can look at. Whether they are resistant or not initially, they kind of get wrapped up in stories. This is what happens. This is the beauty of cinema. It's like an ultimate medium. Dictators, terrible though they are smart, usually, and they can see that.
And it's also much easier to control and censor than writing, for example.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about the creative work that they made under, while they were in North Korea, and you get a sense that she's proud of some works, especially those that went on to win awards. But I was wondering about if you're able to find out how they look back on the films that they made under duress.
Well, I think Shin did say that a couple of the films they made in North Korea he regarded as amongst their best. I think they probably managed to separate the other experiences they had there and the kind of sense of being prisoners from the actual filmmaking. Making movies was something that they both loved to do, and particularly Shin, was an opportunist, and so, anything that gave him the chance to make more films was great. So I don't think they'd look back on the actual filmmaking in a bad light. I think the problem was that they were making these films in North Korea, and how long could they really carry on doing that?
It was a light ball and chain, perhaps.
But it's worth noting these films are all period films, which allowed them to kind of distance it. That was a choice made by Shin and Choi to do that. And also, it's not exactly the same, but it is analogous to working in a studio system. You've got certain rules you have to play by. You cannot do certain things. They knew this. They've had this experience before. A lot of filmmakers have these experiences. Yes, Kim Jong-il may be oppressive outside of his cinema production, but it was just like working on any studio head. Play by the rules.
You guys were at the Sundance editing lab this past summer, I believe. Like, you come there, and I imagine your film is pretty much complete. How did you fine tune? What did you get out of that experience specifically?
Well, it wasn't finished.
Okay.
We were under pressure to finish the film, but at the same time we kind of run out of money. It felt like we were running out of time, and we no longer had an editor because the editor we were working with had to go off into another project he was already committed to. So the labs, Sundance found us a great editor to work with, who we began working with a couple of weeks before the labs remotely, and then we met at the labs and worked with him there, carried on working with him afterwards, Jim Hession. I think we were always under such kind of time pressure with the edit in London, there was never really time to kind of just sit back from the movie for a little while, take a little bit of space to kind of really think about where we're going to take this for the final stage of the edit, and in particular with the tapes, because we hadn't had the tapes for that long by that point. In fact, some of them were still being translated during that time.
Wow.
And the final translations only came in after the labs. So I think really it was about taking the time to really think, okay, how are we going to take the structure that we have and just develop it one more stage, using the tapes to kind of plot the story around.
Yeah, to thread it. It's those tapes are gold.
Yeah, I mean, you said it when we came across the rest of them. We felt like we had struck gold.
Compelling admission of truths from the great leader. I'll finish with this. Once the story is complete, we go into North Korea's timeline, and one scene that harkens back to this idea that the actress and the director had to give their best performance of their lifetime in order to escape a situation. And then I was looking at these people that are overly dramatic with their grief. And I was thinking, they have to do acting themselves. They have to get into that same mindset. I was just wondering if you had anything to say about the inclusion of those scenes specifically, and maybe if there's a parallel to how she had to give the best performance of her life, and how he had to direct the best films of his life in order to get out of that situation.
Well, I mean, you said it. I mean, that was, one of the reasons that we wanted to include it there, is because
Question and answer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. Question and answer.
Well,
okay.
I see. We had always responded to this footage of the crying. It's just, it is a grotesque performance. We're aware of this, and of course we're approaching Choi and Shin's story with this in mind. So we had envisaged that we would end the movie in this way for a long time.
Okay.
There are parallels indeed between the kind of performance they have to do to survive in North Korea. It's in the structure of the film, Choi and Shin, to just escape from their private torments. He's in jail. He's in Kim's summer house. To escape from there, they had to do what Kim said they should do. This is how the film ends, with people just doing what they can just to survive. And this is still happening now. You've got to put on a show to survive.
Crazy.
Yeah, and that's kind of, what ultimately we found so fascinating in the tapes, is that this relationship between Shin and Kim develops. At one stage, it almost kind of feels like it's becoming a kind of bromance, like a buddy movie. And you're not really sure who's manipulating who. And as the relationship develops, you realise there's a kind of game going on. And, ultimately that leads to the way out.
Yeah, that's gold. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on the
Thank you
film.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.